We're going to be in 2 Kings 5. 2 Kings chapter 5. I want us to go ahead and just read the chapter and then go back and make a few points. Chapter 5, verse 1. Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master, highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he could cure him of his leprosy." Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. "By all means go," the king of Aram replied. "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 600 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, "With this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy." As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes, and he said, "Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? What does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me." When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message: "Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and his chariots, and he stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him to say, "Go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed." But Naaman went away angry and said, "I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot, and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed?" So he turned and went off in a rage. Naaman's servants went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, 'Wash and be cleansed'?" So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and he said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant." The prophet answered, "As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing." And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. "If you will not," said Naaman, "please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry. For your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord." Notice that's the capital Lord. "But may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he's leaning on my arm, and I have to bow there also, when I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this." "Go in peace," Elisha said. After Naaman had traveled some distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said to himself, "My master was too easy on Naaman, this Aramean, by not accepting from him what he brought. As surely as the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him." So Gehazi hurried after Naaman. When Naaman saw him running toward him, he got down from the chariot to meet him. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "Everything is all right," Gehazi answered. "My master sent me to say, 2 young men from the company of the prophets have just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothing." "By all means, take 2 talents, said Naaman. He urged Gehazi to accept them, and then tied up the 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 sets of clothing. He gave them to 2 of his servants, and they carried them ahead of Gehazi. When Gehazi came to the hill, he took the things from the servants and put them away in the house. He sent the men away, and they left. When he went in and stood before his master, Elisha asked him, "Where have you been, Gehazi?" "Your servant didn't go anywhere," Gehazi answered. But Elisha said to him, "Was not my spirit with you when the man got down from his chariot to meet you? Is this the time to take money, or to accept clothing, or olive groves, or vineyards, or flocks and herds, or male and female slaves? Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and to your descendants forever." Then Gehazi went from Elisha's presence, and his skin was leprous. It was as if it had become as white as snow. The first thing we have to set aside in this account is that this story of Naaman the leper is not about baptism. I grew up on great sermons with Naaman the leper as an example of Christian baptism. Now, you can take some lessons from what Naaman did, and you can apply it to Christian baptism. He was a good example in several things. However, this is not a story. It's not a lesson about Christian baptism. So I've got 6 things down here that I wanted to mention, and while I'm mentioning, you can be formulating and feel free to bring up your points here in just a minute. Number 1, even great people, very important people, have needs. Sometimes we know what they are, and sometimes we don't. Unfortunately, for a lot of folks these days, if you're famous, folks like to kind of come in behind you and find out what's wrong with you and publish it widely. So it's really kind of hard to hide any problems that you have if you're a public figure. This guy was a commander in the army. He was well known. He was well liked. His boss, the king, really thought highly of him. He was very good at what he did. He was a great soldier. And then you've got that little tagline. He was a great soldier, but he had leprosy. And that made me think a little bit about the Israelites at that time frame. Under the law of Moses, if you had leprosy, you could not be in the company of others. You were separated. So for Naaman to be in the company of his soldiers shows that he was from a slightly different culture. They did not do as much separation for those skin diseases as did the Israelites, if the Israelites were following the law that God had given them. But it says that the king liked him so much because God was helping Naaman win battles. Did you get the impression as we read on through that Naaman knew much about God? I don't think so. I don't think God was honoring Naaman and giving Naaman success just because Naaman was a faithful guy. I think God had chosen to use Naaman and to use his expertise in that army of Aramea to do what God wanted to do in that area. So he's blessing somebody that may or may not have known much about God, and he's using him in a way that's necessary, that's needed for the things that God has planned to do. At this point in history, Israel is on the decline. This is the 8th century. We've got about another 100 years before the Assyrians are going to rise up and conquer the north. The Arameans were kind of located to the eastern side of what we call Syria, and that whole area becomes the Assyrian Empire. So a little farther north from Aramea would be Nineveh, which is the capital of the Assyrian nation by the time it really comes to its strength. So God is building up Assyria, and lots of good things are happening for the Arameans, for the Assyrians, and Naaman is part of that, but I'm not sure how much Naaman knows about God himself. He gets the word from a young girl that if he would go and present himself in Israel, that he could get a healing for his leprosy. So he takes advice from a slave girl. What does that tell you?
He's open-minded.
Yeah. He's open-minded. What else? He's desperate. There you go. When you really have a lot of problems and you don't know what to do to fix your problems, you're a lot more open-minded. If you've got things under control, you don't have to listen to anybody. You can just go on about your life and make your own decisions and things are fine. When you've got leprosy and can't do anything about it, you listen to little slave girls. And she says, I know who can cure you. I'd hate to tell you how many people have told Becky that she needs to take horse dewormer. You know, it's just how desperate are you? Are you going to start taking horse dewormer? Jesse, you know, I mean, you go. People have answers, and it just depends on how desperate you are as to whether you would get involved with anything like that. So desperate people are more likely to listen, and he does. In fact, his boss says, let me fund the trip. Let me give you some money, and I'll send you to the king, and I'll send a letter to go with you to the king so that he'll know that, you know, it's all on the up and up and that he's come from me to find some kind of cure in Israel. Unfortunately, the king himself takes it almost as an affront because you've got the commander of the army of a neighboring powerhouse shows up at your residence and says, oh, my king sent me to you because you can fix my leprosy. And the king says, well, you know, who made me God? I don't have any chance of doing anything about your leprosy. And now that I'm telling you no, what does that do to our relationship as kingdoms? Are you going to go back now and tell your king that the king of Israel wouldn't do anything for you? And is that going to cause a rub between our two nations? And, you know, Jehoram knows that the Arameans are getting stronger and stronger and stronger. I don't think he wants to mess with these people. So it's a terrible thing for him to get this message. The power of God may be represented by a nation, but actually it's put to use in lives of individuals. Our country for years has had that, what may be a misnomer these days, that we are the Christian nation. We're more Christian than a lot of nations, but we may not be as Christian a nation perhaps as we were years ago, or maybe we just hear dissenting opinions more readily now that we've got so much ease of information. But the king, as the representative of the nation, has nothing to offer. It's somebody within the nation that has something to offer to the man. And it doesn't say that Jehoram said, let me tell you who to go see. Jehoram is just upset and worried. Elisha hears about what's going on, and Elisha volunteers. Right? Let's let him know that there really is a God in Israel. Let's let him know that there's really a prophet of God in Israel. Don't just send him home. Let's help him, but let's help him understand that it's not the king and it's not the nation, it's the God that is behind this. And so Elisha calls for him. I find it interesting that Elisha decides not to come out of the house. Don't you? I mean, he's traveled all this way. He's been to see Jehoram. Jehoram sends him on to Elisha, and Elisha doesn't come out of the house. He just stays where he is, sends a servant to go out and tell him what to do. Sometimes the grace of God seems too easy for people. Right? This may be one of the best points from a baptismal sermon having to do with Naaman, that people think about baptism as being silly. Why would I do that? Why does that have anything to do with salvation? Why would letting somebody dunk me underwater and say a few words, why does that have anything to do with salvation? And so Naaman gets the news not in pomp and circumstance. Elisha doesn't come out and visit with him, and he's kind of expecting everybody to robe up for the occasion and get out there and really have a big confab, and it doesn't happen. Elisha just sends a servant, says, tell him to go dip 7 times in the Jordan River. And so we still have that sort of problem in the modern era. And then finally, sometimes the grace of God seems too inexpensive. We want to do something in response. And that could be anywhere from what Naaman's problem was, where he says, I brought money. I've got stuff to pay for the cure, to pay for whatever it was that you were going to do. So he expected Elisha to come out. There would be a big show. He would get healed. And when he got healed, then he would give the money. And that there would be this big exchange. And instead he gets a servant who comes out and says, go dip 7 times in the Jordan and go home. And when he is cured, he wants to pay for the cure. Now, in my life, I'm a preacher's kid, raised in very conservative churches of Christ. I want to do something to say, I've got, here's my salvation, let me pay for it. Right? Not that I count less the grace of God, perhaps, but that I just feel like there's something I'm supposed to do. And if I don't do something big, if I don't do something impressive, then somehow the grace of God's too cheap. Anybody feel like that? Is it just me?
You just want to say thank you in some way.
Yeah. And God allows us to live in His grace, but there's not something, you skim through the New Testament. What is it? What's that thing that we could do? And so down through the centuries, religious groups have come up with ideas like, make a pilgrimage, right? Go all the way to Rome. When Martin Luther visited Rome in the 1500s, he crawled up the steps, praying prayers as he went. And later he reported that he didn't feel any more forgiven when he got to the top than he was at the bottom. We try to find that something that we can do to say, God, here we are being faithful. Here we are being righteous. And God says, what I want you to do is accept my grace. What I want you to do is be my people. Let me give you the gift. Elisha says, I don't need any of your stuff. What's it going to do for me? You ever thought about that? What's it going to do for me? Paul, in his address on Mars Hill, says, I want to talk to you about the God who made heaven and earth. He doesn't need your stuff. He's not worshiped with hands as if he needs anything. He's got it. He's got everything he needs. He made everything you have. So why do you think that somehow you could give him something that would make him love you more? Naaman wanted to give the prophet of God something. And this has been a few years since I did this, and I didn't re-look it up. But it's about 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, and 2 new outfits that Gehazi embezzles at the end of this thing. Follows him and lies. And I know I've mentioned this before, but if you lie, oh well, you lie. But if you lie and you stick my name in it, that really hacks me off. So Elisha is back at the house, and Gehazi is lying and sticking Elisha's name in there. And he embezzles all this money. Did Naaman want to pay the money? Absolutely. In fact, he says, I need to change the clothes and I need this much silver. He says, take more. Gives him 2 guys to carry it, and it says they went in front of Gehazi. What does that mean? You get the picture? Think back to Absalom, David's son Absalom. He had guys that went in front of him wherever he went to let people know he was coming. Right? It meant he was important. So Gehazi doesn't just get paid. He gets paid and he gets to look important because these guys are carrying the loot that has been given to him by the commander of the Aramean army, and they're going in front of him back to the house. They get to the house, he takes the money, puts it in the house, and goes back to see his boss. Why would you imagine that Elisha, the prophet of God, how often is he referred to just as man of God? Right? And they went and they consulted the man of God, the prophet of God, the guy who listens to God, the guy who knows God, the guy who just helped in the healing of leprosy. How do you not think that he knows what you did? And that's exactly what Elisha said. Was my spirit not with you when you chased down Gehazi and lied to him, took that stuff for yourself? Now you get to have the leprosy that has been taken away from Naaman. And I think, and I didn't spend enough time reading far enough ahead, but I think that's the last time we talk about Gehazi. Remember when we met him, he just kind of shows up. He's the man of God's helper. Elijah was the man of God. Elisha was his helper. Elisha took over when Elijah went back to heaven. I don't think Gehazi gets to do that. He gets the leprosy instead. Let me give you one New Testament passage. Look at Luke 4. Luke chapter 4. This healing actually gets mentioned by Jesus in the New Testament. He is visiting his hometown. And in this section in Mark says he could not do many miracles because of their unbelief. Okay? So the people know him. They knew him all of his life. He's, a prophet is not without honor except in his own country and among his own people. So that's the group he's talking to. Look at Luke 4:23. Jesus said to them, "Surely you will quote this proverb to me, 'Physician, heal yourself.' And you will tell me, 'Do here in your hometown what we've heard that you did in Capernaum.' Truly I tell you," he continued, "no prophet is accepted in his hometown. I assure you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut up for 3.5 years, and there was a severe famine throughout the land. But Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon." Right? We met her. She's the one that hardly had anything left in the jars, and he said, "Feed me first." He works the miracle. She has enough food to carry on. He later raises her son from the dead. This is not an Israelite woman. This is not necessarily enemies, but outsiders at the time. And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet, but none of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian. His point is, God does what he wants, where he wants, when he wants. You can have an opinion, but you don't get a vote. God's in charge. And so he chose to do his work. He chose to do his miracles in places that you wouldn't appreciate. In fact, it makes him so mad. Verse 28, all the people in the synagogue were furious. They got up, drove him out of the town, took him to the brow of a hill on which the town was built in order to throw him off the cliff. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. So his own hometown folks were ready to kill him. I wonder where his mom was on that day. I wonder where his brothers were on that day. They saw all of this happening. He's talking to people from his neighborhood, and they want to kill him because he says, there was this Syrian guy, and there were lots of lepers, but God chose to heal him. Be the kind of people that God wants to work with, that can accept God's miracles, that can be used in his kingdom. They were certainly not that kind of people. So the Arameans keep getting stronger. Naaman keeps winning battles. Things work out really well in the north and the east of Israel, while Israel continues to decline. And like I said, about this time, we start having some prophets working in the north and then working even farther north. God sends Jonah to Nineveh. So I don't know whether we'll get to him next week, but we'll get to him soon. He was during this time frame, about 100 years before the Assyrian army comes and wipes out the north. So we're moving into that time frame. We're kind of in the middle of the 800s BC. Questions? Thoughts?